Let's give a big Clark College welcome to Eliza Greenwood.
Thank you, everyone. It's so fun to be here. Bruce asked me to come and speak about my experience in the world of digital marketing and digital accessibility. My name is Eliza Greenwood. My Twitter handle is E_LizaG. Is anyone here on Twitter? Nice. That's more than half. Very good. Please follow me and tweet out anything that you learned tonight or want to share, or any questions for me. I love interacting on Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn and would love to connect with each of you on LinkedIn as well. Who's on LinkedIn? Nicely done. Nicely done. You guys are already ahead of the class from last year, I would say.
I was here when you spoke last year.
Were you here last year?
But
Yeah.
I was in class to get credit for that class, but it was awesome.
Okay. Well, thank you. Okay. Well, good. Second time around. Hi. We will have a bunch of time for questions along the end, but if there's something that comes up as we go, then feel free to raise your hand or shout out. And I'll go ahead and tell you a little bit more about myself. I don't have to look back because it's right in front of me. I'm a freelance digital marketer. That means that I do social media, analytics, pay-per-click advertising, user experience. I'm not a developer, so I'm not building websites. Like, I'll use like something like Squarespace to make a website. I know a little bit of code, so, and I think that most of you are learning to code and become developers. Is that not? I'm getting some nods. What else do we have?
Web and graphic design.
Ooh, web and graphic design. Okay. Fantastic. Any other mix of career aspirations?
Oh, well, isn't it called a dev designer?
Dev designer.
Developer designer. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. I might have some need for some designers, so maybe we should talk. That'd be great, actually. I'm also an accessibility evangelist, and I'll be talking mostly about accessibility today. You see there it says hashtag A11Y. That's a numeronym for the word accessibility, and it's all about digital accessibility. If you wanted to look it up on Twitter or whatnot, you could see kind of a good conversation there about digital accessibility. I did present at the CSUN conference in 2016, which is the big accessible technology conference. I'm always evangelizing to my fellow marketers in the Portland area and on my own social channels. I'm a Beaverton transplant. I just moved to Beaverton a year and a half ago, and I'm a new puppy parent. My website is there, elizagreenwood.com, so feel free to check that out. And as I said, I'm a new puppy owner. That's my darling Darby. She is 14 weeks old, and her breed is called Lagotto Romagnolo. So it's not that common of a breed. We found her because we were looking specifically for a dog of that breed because she's hypoallergenic and she'll get up to about 30 pounds, and she's supposedly not as difficult to train as some of the other dogs in that area because we're new dog owners. So that's why we picked that breed, and we're very excited about her, and there will be more pictures of her. At least one more. She's home keeping my wife really busy right now because she's got lots and lots of energy. Yeah. So this presentation will definitely have more doggy pictures. It's going to encourage you to find a niche market for yourself, whatever your passion or area of interest is. It's going to examine the niche market of digital accessibility, and it's going to provide some application tips for accessibility. And I was inspired to talk today about finding a niche market for yourself. This is one of my mentors, Inez Russell Gomez. She's the editorial writer at the Santa Fe New Mexican. She's a mentor of mine from when I was in middle school. And I remember in middle school her telling me, if you want to get into a really good school in college or you want to do well in your career, she's like, it's not going to be so much about what your grades are specifically, but if you're going to do something that really stands out and find something that's really unique to yourself, right? Like, do you have some special, I can juggle and pat my head and, in a kilt, or some kind of special, really unique hobby. I don't remember exactly. It was something about juggling, and I just remember that really sticking out and thinking a lot about that way back when. That's her with her dog Bobo and her son Joaquin. I still keep in touch with her, and that was the advice that she gave me, and that was I would say one of the things that started me along this track of finding really niche markets that I'm passionate about. So in college, I did end up studying deaf theater. I was really interested in theater and performance and sign language and deaf culture. So I kind of created my own curriculum with a theater degree, and I studied deaf theater, and I was all about it, and I got really immersed. And then I graduated from college, and what do you do with a deaf theater degree, right? Like, wow. Should have taken some graphic design classes or some developer classes or something, right? But what I did end up doing with that is that I ended up becoming, after doing office work and kind of admin work and whatnot, I was a sign language interpreter for 7 years. And I was fluent in the language, of course, because, well, I have a deaf sister, and because of my time in college. And so I was able to kind of create a vocational career for myself in services in sign language interpreting. And sometimes I'll still do a little bit of sign language interpreting here and there. But the reason that I shifted kind of away from sign language interpreting is because in that profession, you are required to be really neutral and to just kind of be there as a conduit for communication, right? And I have lots of opinions. And I don't like to just, I like to show up and to be service and to provide service and to help people. But what I really like is to build capacity and to make change and to, come in and apply strategy and use my critical thinking to create something. So I ended up taking this digital marketing program, and there's so much that you can do with digital marketing, right? There's so much, as you know, on the web that we can leverage our creative talents for, from e-commerce and e-learning, helping brick and mortar stores amplify their sales, people who provide services, people who provide information. I'm just a huge fan. I've been a huge fan for a long time. So I took this this digital marketing course, and I thought, well, what am I going to sell? Like plungers? Like what am I, what do I care about? Like there's so much online that there's so many different directions that you can go, and where was it that I wanted to focus? I didn't end up being toilet plungers. I haven't done any of that, but I've done kind of a good selection of helping people in these various areas, digital marketing with e-commerce, e-learning, brick and mortar services, you name it. But the area that I really got passionate about was in digital accessibility. So here we are back to kind of me being in a space of helping people with disabilities have greater access. But it's exciting with technology because you're creating more access that allows people to be independent, right? And the way the technology is growing these days is just really exciting. What does that mean for digital accessibility for people with disabilities? That's what we're going to talk about today. As far as what it meant for me in my career, what I thought that it meant when I started was I was going to have like a T-shaped career, right? Where I was a generalist in digital marketing, where I could do newsletters and I could do websites and I could do analytics and pay-per-click advertising and all of that stuff. And then I specialize in digital accessibility, where I understand technically how to do digital accessibility, but I also understand the market, right? So like someone who is providing a digital accessibility audit or someone who is creating tools or whatnot, I have an understanding as a marketer, I have an understanding of what their market is, and I'm able to not only apply the technical aspects of accessibility to their marketing, but also to apply strategy to whatever it is that they're trying to sell. Digital accessibility for people with disabilities. Woo! Why is this so important to me? One of the things that it always comes back to me about is employment. As I mentioned, I have a deaf sister. I have a lot of friends with disabilities, and the employment gap between people with disabilities and people without disabilities is just too huge. According to the Annual Disability Statistics Compendium, people with disabilities are employed at 34.9%. This was from 2016, and people without disabilities, 76%. And that's tough, and that's something that I see, on an anecdotal level, and the evidence absolutely supports it. The statistics support it as well. Department of Labor just in October of 2017 their findings is that people with disabilities were participating at 21% and people without at 68.3%. That was just from the month of October. So this is where I get really fired up, is kind of around employment. So for some people it would be around health. There's all sorts of disparity around health or education or whatnot. But for me, it kind of always goes back to employment. And I don't know, I figure a number of you here are probably looking into second careers for yourselves and thinking about employment in the long run as well, and how we all fit into the picture here. When I think about when you hear those unemployment numbers, it's a little bit misleading, right? Because the way that when you hear, like on the radio, someone reporting unemployment numbers, that means people who are claiming unemployment. That doesn't mean everybody who doesn't have a job, right? Because it could be that someone is a stay-at-home mom and they're not trying to find a job, or they weren't fired recently, so they're not eligible for unemployment. They would love to be getting a check maybe, but they're not eligible for unemployment. Or maybe someone does fit the criteria for unemployment and they're not claiming unemployment. So those people don't count, right? And then we hear other things about, oh, unemployment is getting so much better, yada yada. But then you look at it generationally about how these baby boomers are aging out of the workforce, right? And so we have these massive shifts happening where you listen to that unemployment number and you go, okay, but what does that really mean, right? So this is a little bit more about why digital accessibility is important to me, because just going online and filing a job application, for example, because everyone's living online these days, if it's not accessible to people with disabilities, how are they going to become more employed, right? Just the application process itself, let alone accommodations when you actually get into the workplace, right? What was that?
I was going to say, I don't think there's a physical unemployment office, because I've been through it, and I think you have to go on the phone.
It's like an online thing, and you call in every week, right? And yeah. Somebody in an office sits somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the rest of the percentage?
Oh, let's see. Are we missing something? Oh, what's missing here? People with disabilities versus people without disabilities. You're doing the math. Is that right? Yeah.
Other.
People with disabilities, people without disabilities. That's an interesting question.
89.3. Yeah.
Yeah, because we're up to 89.3%
People
there.
like you that you were talking about before that choose not to work.
20-something%. Yeah.
I want to look more into that. I'm very interested in checking into that. Thank you for asking. Yeah, people who don't choose not to identify, maybe whether they have a disability or not. It gets messy, right? Reporting disabilities, because
There's a group of people that don't.
Who don't report it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Who don't self-identify,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and you notice, and so the numbers person here in the back, here it said 21% versus 68% for people with and without. And then the compendium back in 2016 said 34.9% versus 76%. My color contrast is really crappy there. I apologize about that. People with disabilities, 34.9, pardon my language too, 34.9%, people without 76%. So how they're measuring this is messy. It's not going to be the same.
Well, I
Yeah.
think it's a different population. So it's 34% of deaf or the disabled population are employed versus those with the population.
Yeah, of
see what I mean? So
100%.
they're not going to add up to 100 anyway. That's not.
Ha!
Because there's like
Yeah.
a labor force versus employment, which is
Yeah,
two
well,
separate.
two different populations.
I love it. Thank you. Nope, yep, very well thought out. Absolutely. 34, yep. So among all of those people who who would I self-identify as having a disability, about 35% of them are employed, whereas people who would not identify as disabled are about 76% employed. And then the same thing with these Department of Labor numbers, I'm assuming. Yep. Thank you. What's your name?
Brent?
Brent?
Yeah.
Thank you, very astute, and great question in the back as well. Okay, so what does this mean in terms of digital accessibility, right? And then in terms of prevalence by disability type, because you say, well, person with a disability, what does this mean exactly? So the top number, where it says hearing 3.5%, that is of the overall population. So of the overall population, 3.5% have a hearing or have identified in this disability compendium survey as having a hearing disability, and 2.3% with a vision disability. that color contrast is a little better. Now, the next number down for people with hearing disabilities, this is for people in that working range, right? Like 18 to 64 years old. So that's 50. So if you just think about people with hearing loss or hearing disabilities, 51% of them are employed, right? And that's within the workforce range, right? So that's not an 80-year-old with hearing loss who's unemployed. We're just talking about, people in that working range. And then as far as people with vision impairments, 41%. And the numbers are different, right? And the technical solutions are going to be different as well. For people with hearing loss, the big thing online is going to be about captions. And video is where everything's going, right? Like video, the young people in the room and the video lovers in the room can tell you that video is the next frontier, absolutely. And so they've done a lot in terms of auto captions, and everyone here has probably seen a YouTube video where you're just like watching the video and it says something really off, right? And the captions are just wrong. They are a lot better now. They're still not great, and even at 95% accuracy, if a caption reads something like, and think about this in terms of like a job training HR video or just a video for class. If it's auto captioned and the speaker says, I can't give you the notes versus I can give you the notes, that makes a big difference, right? And all the different accents and everything, the technology is just not there to get that level of precision. Yeah.
The current trends I've been reading on, especially from this class here, is that the future marketing trends, digital marketing trends, is going to be moving from pre-recorded video to live video, like Facebook Live and things like that. How will accessibility be able to keep up with something like that if more places are going towards live feed or unless we're going to wait for the bots to fill it in for us as we go.
Sure, great question. Yeah, it's something to stay in front of in terms of the technology. I'm not aware of auto captioning applications for live Facebook feeds, for example, or live YouTube feeds, but I'm sure that the technology is going there. We all use Siri, right? And that's got voice recognition. So it's very similar technology, and I imagine it's probably more of a platform thing at this point, which just stay tuned on that, right? Right up front here.
So last time I asked basically the same question, but as I've delved into more technology, especially with Google and with Google's text-to-speech ability even integrated into Google Docs, I think that that's going to become more utilized for on-the-spot necessary things, to use those automated systems to do the captionings with the live feeds.
So are you talking about like Google Video?
No, not.
Okay.
But so in Google, you have the text-to-speech. You can hit the microphone and say what you want. Okay, Google Go, or Siri, or Bixby, whatever, or Alexa. So that technology is available, and it's getting better and better and better.
Agreed.
So I would venture to guess that they are going to be able to somehow tag that onto a live feed and get a script as that's going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's on its way for sure. I haven't personally heard about who's doing it, but I imagine IBM is at least one front runner.
If not, let's do it.
Let's do it here. Let's do it tonight. Did you want to?
Well, my wife is deaf, so
okay.
But one thing I've noticed is in her community that the deaf people are not accepting of those Google translations. I keep telling her they're getting really good. They're getting really good. They don't want nothing, at least in her group. They want nothing to do with it. I said, no, it's not. We want it. Yet there's also mistakes with people who do the supposedly professional captioning of these things. And so I'm telling there's. Nothing's perfect, and it was interesting. The community, at least in her community, they just really like it.
Yeah, well, and even as a sign language interpreter, my accuracy, if I'm 95% accurate, that's a good day for me. To be honest with you, it's a lot of work, As far as the captions, and this makes me wonder as well. There's all this content that's already been loaded up onto YouTube, and now we're at 95%. But a year ago, what were we at? Maybe 85%, right? Like it's gotten a lot better in the last year, and I'd be surprised if the auto captions were being regenerated. So it's possible that I wonder how her experience would be, looking at new content versus content from just
Well, it's
6
also
or 12
culture, there's
months
something,
ago.
at least in her group, it's a cultural difference. I mean, they just say, oh, no, I don't like that, you know.
They don't
whereas-
like the captions at all, or
No,
just
they
the
don't
auto
like
captions?
the auto-generated captions, so it's just,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
bias. And I
Well,
don't
and-
Think
like
about
that.
how many different languages.
They've had.
Yeah.
So many, yeah. Well, and and I think that, like, as someone who's done a lot of sign language interpreting, in fact, I used to interpret up at Cascade Middle School here in Vancouver. There would be a lot of situations, not necessarily at Cascade, wherever I was interpreting, where there'd be a video and they'd be like, oh, it has captions, and they turn it on, and then so as an interpreter, I'm like, that's great. I get my hands down, I get a rest of my upper body, right? It's a lot of work. And then I'm looking over the captions and I'm like, I gotta go back and, I gotta, there's, so it's, people think, oh, that's the easy out, but then it may cause more harm than good. Did you have a comment in the back?
Well, I was just wondering about live news feeds. They're doing a fairly decent job of closed captioning now.
Yeah, those are, and probably governed by the FCC, a human being who's typing that out.
I know this is going to sound really weird, but has there been any research or anything done where like an animated person could be doing the translating? I was just
So like a holographic interpreter or whatnot?
yeah. Or
Here's what
or
I
a
used to picture.
cartoon
Let me tell
person
you.
or something?
I used to picture, so I'd be sitting in my booth because I did sign language interpreting. I'd be sitting in my booth interpreting. I'd be like, my brain could keep going, but my arms are tired.
Right.
I wish I could just think the interpretation and have a holographic image of myself projected and then put my hands down. Or like, what if my feet could get up there and like, no. There's cool technology that is coming as far as making it holographic, and I would say like University of Washington is probably locally like doing some really interesting stuff with that.
Oh, okay. So there is somebody working on that.
Yeah,
That's cool.
it's coming. It's coming along.
I think the biggest issue that would come with that, the idea of a holographic thing doing the signs for you, is it's running off the same program that would be. It has to look at what you're saying or what you're signing and interpret it, and whether it be interpreted in text or in like a hologram signing, it still has to be accurate. I mean, you can have text saying one thing while the person is saying something else, or you can have a hologram saying one thing while the person is saying something else. It still has to be accurate for both cases.
Yes, you're right, and there's another level because it's translating into another language,
That's
whereas
true.
the captions is just word for word
words,
in the
yeah.
English. Mm-hmm. Can I keep going? Cool. Okay, so great comments. Okay, so next slide, we were talking about, deaf people, and now this is for blind people. How blind people access the internet. How does a blind person use a computer? So this is Tommy Edison. He's got all sorts of followers. I think he was first made famous for like his stint on Howard Stern. But he does all these great videos about how does a blind person do this, or how does a blind person do this. Let's see if I can.
Wait, let me make sure the volume is going to be up.
Is it even coming up at all?
Try it. Oh, I turned off the internet.
Oh, you turned it off.
Yeah. Hold on a second.
I mean,
Please hold.
So this is a video demo of Tommy Edison showing how he uses a computer because, how do you use a computer without a mouse? Right? We could probably just Google it because the link isn't quite working on YouTube.
Okay, so we have.
I thought that was the start of the video program.
No, I just have to turn up the volume here. My glasses. Which one is volume, Eliza? Oh, that's too loud.
Oh, okay.
Keep going. Okay, stop there.
Okay.
Where were we? Presenter view?
Yeah.
Let's just go to slideshow.
Search for the video.
Hold on. I'm gonna try to get it to work here. I don't.
There it goes.
I'm just really curious now.
Tommy Edison. Okay. You know what I'm gonna get on YouTube, right?
What? Not allowed?
Hmm.
Which ones?
Can I do it?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. mean, we could pick any of these, really. How to find people use a computer.
You know how to zoom out?
No, but I should.
You need me.
I do need you.
This one?
Yeah.
That's good.
But there's also
Oh,
a
now
very
I gotta
other
switch
simple
it.
but important shot here,
Okay.
and that's this 50-50. It's a good confrontational angle.
That's okay, this is an ad.
You say there are only 7 stories. I think there might only be 1 story.
And it's not gonna move.
It will.
We
Yeah,
all
that's not.
understand stories. It makes us believe we can all direct. And
A lot of people are curious. They wonder, blind people using the computer? Come on, how does that work? Hey, it works pretty good. This here is a 2009 MacBook Pro. Right? I think it's a 13-inch screen. It's a little one. What do I need the big screen for? Anyway, there's an option on this machine that will actually read the screen to me. You can find it in System Preferences. Just go to Accessibility, and there it is. It's called VoiceOver.
welcome to OS 10. VoiceOver is running. System preferences, accessibility window, toolbar.
So let's say I want to send somebody an email. Now remember, I'm in VoiceOver, so it works a little bit differently. Right? But we'll go to the dock.
Dock. Finder.
And that's the Finder, and then we go across to Mail. So on the way we have
Launchpad. Mission control. App Store. Dashboard. Mail.
and there's Mail. So now I hit the space bar to open it.
And Finder. Desktop. 865 rows added.
All right, so let's compose a new piece of mail. So to do this, we'll hit Command N.
New message window. To edit text.
Now it asks to whom I'm going to send it. So we'll send it to hello at Blind Film Critic.
Blind Film Critic. Period. Com.
Now you hear it repeat when I'm typing here too. So we'll tab across now to see.
CC. Edit text.
We don't need to CC.
Subject. Edit text.
Our subject will be what? Fun!
Fun.
Exclamation.
Exclaim.
Now we'll tab across to where we can write our note.
Edit text. And comma. Space. What fun we had today. H. Shooting. Videos. Period. Space. You. Rock. Space. T. E.
And now all we have to do is send it. We use Command and Shift at the same time, and then D. Okay, so now let's keep that email address between us, all right? No spammers, any of that kind of thing, all right? Please? Thank you. So the fun you have now that we showed you how to set this all up and everything, go to your friend's Mac and just set it up for him while he's out in the room or whatever.
He's funny, and the videos are nice and short, and it gives you a sense, right, of kind of, as you're thinking about these web applications and what you're developing, how you want to build them so that they work for all sorts of folks, right? Let's see. Home. No. View. Slideshow. Is that up on this page?
Mm-hmm. No, it's to left from view. Up.
Slideshow. Thank you. Presenter view. I do like the presenter view. Okay, so that was Tammy Edison. Was that new for anyone to see how that worked? Yeah. Okay. Any quick comments or thoughts?
Oh, I had a thought while I was looking at him doing, typing. I just realized he probably has so much experience. He probably just does muscle memory, to figure out where things are.
On the
Me, I
keyboard.
still don't have muscle memory, and I still have to be like, oh, I have to look at the keyboard,
Right.
even now. So
Sure.
that's cool.
Sure.
Probably, he probably had a braille pad on top of it too.
Oh yeah, maybe you had a braille
Oh,
pad.
that's true. Yeah.
The other thing to remember is blind users will have the speed of the read back 5 times faster than you heard Tommy's.
Yeah, so you heard the computer voice saying the computer voice said exclaim, and he typed exclamation, right? And the way that you heard it was slow enough for you to hear that. But for someone who's blind, who's really using this technology and has been trained on it, you wouldn't have understood that necessarily.
One thing I'm just recognizing from a design perspective is that obviously there's a blank screen, but everything is to the right. It's not all over the place. So it makes me think of, for designing a website or think of that with in mind, having how things organized can make it easier for someone to access it with the screen reader. I just kind of was just aware of looking at that.
Kind of the order that it appears in, and not just for someone who's completely blind, but someone who, you know, has low vision as well, right? Yeah.
That's why they put navigations either at the top or on the right side as opposed to the left, because it reads right to left. And the navigation, if it's on the left side, gets bypassed, and that's probably what's important. So.
And that's not an accessibility thing. That's an everyone thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. That's good design. Cool. Okay. A couple of other types of disabilities that are affected by using the web. Also stats from the Disability Compendium. So of the overall population, they would say 4.8 have identified as some kind of cognitive disability, and in the working age group of that population, 25.5% of them are employed. Ambulatory, this one is a little bit misleading. Let me explain, because ambulatory, my belief is the way that they wrote this disability, the study that they did is probably people who are using wheelchairs. And if you're using a wheelchair, that's not affecting how you use the web, right? Necessarily. But let's just go with it. So ambulatory people, probably people who use wheelchairs, are at 6.6% of the general population, and among the working age of those, 24.1% of them are employed. So how would somebody with some kind of movement impairment have an issue using the web? Any guesses?
Being able to click.
Being able to click. Like an actual, like, you know, with you have CP or like something with your hands or whatnot. The Disability Compendium doesn't report on these folks and what their employment issues are or what percent of the population they are. But we do think about them when we're coming up with our designs and, you know, and developing and whatnot. And I wanted to put them in there. As far as cognitive goes, kind of putting information out so that it's really clear, regardless of someone's reading level or regardless of someone's, you know, traumatic brain injury, for example. And this is just for busy people as well. Like, you think about plain language and how you're wording things and how you're structuring information so that, you know, even here I am tonight talking to you all, and I'm thinking, how can I structure this in a way so that it's easily accessible and you all understand it, you know, regardless of your different backgrounds and whatnot. So I would say that that's probably the research for how to make the web accessible for folks with cognitive impairments is up and coming. A lot more of it, in terms of the lawsuits and whatnot, have covered more for people who are blind or with low vision. But all of these 4 areas are areas that that would affect web use. As far as implementation for you as developers and designers, there is this handy-dandy guide called WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guideline. For the longest time, they were going off of Guidelines 2.0. Now they're kind of working on a working draft of 2.1. It is really good bedtime reading. It's very dry. The basic principles are like they've gone through and created all these principles around web accessibility, and it's not based on technology. It's actually based on testable things. So they've come up with these guidelines saying, well, if someone with, you know, this kind of disability or that kind of disability were to go in and actually try to perform that function, would it be perceivable? Would they actually be able to tell it was there? Would it be operable? Would they be able to actually make it work? Would it be easy to understand? Would they be able to make it work in a way that it's supposed to? And is it robust? Is it going to break when they move on to a different device or they apply system technology to it or whatnot? That is the really quick version, right? It's much more complex than that, much more technical than that. Another broad stroke is that there's 3 levels of accessibility that you might be trying to reach. So level A, and there's sometimes overlap, but for the most part, I would say level A is kind of like the most high priority and kind of easier stuff to reach accessibility on. Level AA being a little bit higher, and then level AAA is very difficult to accomplish. Level AAA is is very difficult to accomplish in terms of making something completely accessible. The biggies that you will notice throughout these standards are keyboard navigation, so what you saw Tommy Edison doing, right? Navigating the screen with his keyboard. Image descriptions, describing what the actual image, the function of the image is. Color contrast, which we didn't even talk about at all. That can have to do with someone with low vision, right? But also just someone with color blindness. Yeah. And then captions on videos. Those are the 4 biggies.
When you were saying that these priorities and how we're able to be able to meet them with ease, is that a cost thing, or is that our capacity technology-wise to meet those demands? What's limiting? You said like we haven't been able, like some things are harder to implement, but these are the easier ones. Is it because accessibility is too expensive, or we don't have the capacity to implement full accessibility to meet everybody's needs?
I mean, so like when you're looking at a website and you want to fix it to make it more accessible, or you're looking at like a UX design and you want to design it so that it is already accessible before it's implemented, there's just going to be a lot of hands-on things that have to be done that are not complex, right? Like adding an image description to a photograph.
Easy.
That's not something that, I mean, I guess the technology is getting there with Facebook and their photo recognition, right? Because Facebook now has the ability to kind of tell you what's in a photo, which is creepy and cool. Let me see if I'm answering your question.
I can handle that after.
So some of it is actually about hands-on human time, and then some of it is about like technically actually making, like, the technology is very complex and not it doesn't scale for everyone to have that. Yeah. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. The most difficult things are going to be shopping carts, forms, tables, and PDFs come up again and again. I'm not sure that PDFs are difficult necessarily, because if you create a PDF starting out as a Word document and it's accessible already, it's going to be accessible. But as far as what you'll hear, like the buzz on where the biggest problems are for folks, having accessible PDFs is a big pain point. And I can tweet these slides out later on as well if that would be helpful to folks, as it looks like I've got some note taking here. As developers and designers, there's some free testing tools that are available that you can test your projects and whatnot with. WebAIM's Wave tool, Chrome. There's a Chrome accessibility tool, a plugin for developers. DQ has a tool called Axe, and those are all free. I just found a checker today. I was like, oh, that looks interesting, and I checked when I have a documentary film project. I went and checked it. I was like, oh, there's lots of errors here. Good thing we're making a new website for that. Hopefully there will be less errors on this next version of the website. And then for the designers, of course, color contrast is going to be kind of a big thing to be thinking about. I like the color contrast analyzer by the Paciello group, but there's lots of really good color contrast tools out there that are free, and yeah. So we've talked about why we do accessibility, and then that was a little bit on kind of how to implement accessibility. And then there's more of the why, right? So this cartoon, if you can't see it, it says it's 2 guys standing in an office, and there's this gigantic carrot walking down the hall with this big stick. And the caption reads, "This is their new big carrot and stick method," right? So the idea being that we are motivated to do accessibility. You motivate people, with a carrot, or you motivate them with a stick. And we've been talking about the carrot a little bit, like the reason that you would make things accessible is because we want everyone to have access to them, right? And also because there's a huge market share of people with disabilities who, they've got money to spend as well. If you're making a website, usually it's because you want people to go spend money there, right? So you want everyone to be able to come spend money on that website, spend their time or read or whatever it is that they're doing. So you want to make it accessible, and that's the carrot aspect. And there's another doggy. We like carrots. Carrots. The other argument, which is popular and in a lot of cases true is that making things more accessible actually makes them better for everyone, right? So looking at things with a universal design concept and thinking about how you want to make it accessible to, you know, a blind person or a person who's deaf. Like for example, putting captions on a video. Well, it's not just for people who have hearing loss. It might be for someone who's looking at the video on their phone and they can't turn the volume on because they're at work, right? Or, you know, it's good to have a transcript there because you don't necessarily want to watch the whole video. You want the transcript there to be able to skim through it, right? And the same thing goes for like actual design principles and structural principles for designing websites as well. So there's that carrot argument. And then there's the stick argument, and that's the compliance aspect of these laws that are we able to see? I'm going to read it all out. There's another dog with a cowboy up on the screen. And this is all about compliance. And the reason that I have this Wild West image up here is because the legal landscape is really evolving. And we've come a long way over the last several years as far as requiring people to make their websites accessible, right? Like my little film project, I would say the website is not great in terms of accessibility. And I don't have, you know, I'm not in a position where I'm like legally being faced with charges because it's not accessible. And so you think about kind of some smaller companies and, oh, well, they're not required. And then maybe larger companies are. Well, who is required? The short answer of that is that higher ed institutions are required. Government institutions are required. Larger companies where it wouldn't be an undue burden to make their website accessible are required. But it's, you know, it's becoming more and more serious. Here in the and for more and more people. Here in the U.S., there's a few laws that support it. Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, that's through the GSA, the Government Services Association. The 21st Century Communications and Video Act, that's through the Department of Justice. And then the Air Carrier Access Act through the Department of Transportation, which actually airlines are governed by an entirely different body of communication requirements. So they all have kind of laws that are worked in. Section 508 is really old. Like you go and look at some of those standards and they're from, you know, a long time ago. Big surprise the government isn't, you know, totally up to speed. But as far as where the courts are going with things, it is based on WCAG 2.0 and 2.1, which is that international guideline that we talked about. And it's interesting, too, to look at it state by state, because states have their own accessibility laws. And so like California, Texas, and New York are a few that have web accessibility laws. And if you work for a software vendor, for example, like California is a big enough, you know, area that you want to be selling to that you might be designing your accessibility according to their state standards. So California is almost at that international tier level of how do you want to go after business in California, how can you comply with their state regulations. Internationally as well, Europe, Australia, India, Canada, especially in Ontario. Ontario's like super strict. Like maybe if my film were an Ontario-based business, I'd be in a lot of trouble, you know. Like they're really strict in Ontario, which is cool. And it's cool to be able to go and find kind of applications and solutions that they're doing that scale for smaller businesses as well. So a couple of examples. The big one was Target in 2008. And they settled their class action lawsuit. It didn't end up going to court, but it was, you know, millions of dollars to the NFB, National Federation for the Blind. They didn't publish their own legal costs, but they awarded $3.7 million to the NFB and attorney fees. And I think that from what I understand, their original argument was, well, yeah, our store has to be accessible to people with disabilities. It's a store, it's a public place, right? People with wheelchairs, whatever. Our website, it's private. Wrong. Wrong. Yeah, and now you go to the accessibility conferences and they're there presenting and they're there, you know, kind of showing that they're wanting to be leaders in the space because they, you know, they messed up on that one. Captions, like I said, there's another dog picture. Netflix had a big class action lawsuit, you know, over $100,000 there that doesn't even mention the class damages. And the cost to actually implement captions in all their videos, they have this tight timeline. I think it was like a 2-year timeline or something. It started in 2012, and then I'm guessing that some of their content they just had to kind of get rid of right? And then they had to go and spend all the money to just caption all of their content, and that was against the National Association for the Deaf. So I mean, that's great progress, and also from a business perspective, it costs money. It's not just like, oh, go turn on the accessibility switch, right? Like it's not someone's just too lazy to go turn it on. It's like, you know, it takes time and thought. Now this is Winn-Dixie, and that's an image from the movie Winn-Dixie, which I haven't seen, but apparently it's a cute movie about a girl with her dog. Isn't it so cute?
Yes.
There's nothing to do with digital accessibility in Winn-Dixie, the movie, as far as I know. Winn-Dixie, the grocery store back east, is what this 2017 case was. And again, e-commerce, right? Like, people want to sell their stuff online, and it's hard to make shopping cart experiences accessible online. So this was the first trial under the American for Disabilities Act. Everything else before that had been settled out of court. And the plaintiff was not looking for damages. They just wanted them to go fix the website. I just want to be able to buy my groceries, you know? And if you can imagine like being blind and trying to buy groceries, like wouldn't it be better to be able to just do it online where everything's described? Like, so yeah, and so basically the judge ended up saying, you know, it cost you $2 million to build the website, and then $7 million a couple years later to go and upgrade your website. I think $250,000 to make your website accessible is not undue burden, you know, if you can handle that. So that's what I ended up coming out with that just this year. And let's see here. That's what I have to share about the compliance side of accessibility. The courts are definitely leaning towards making, you know, more and more organizations, companies accessible. If you're interested in more of this kind of thing, I do have a call to action, and that's to come to our happy hour meetup at the Lucky Labrador Brew Pub in Portland at 6:30 on December 5th. That's over on Southeast Hawthorne. It's accessibility meetup. We have it usually every other month. This one is a happy hour to come and mix and mingle and talk with other people who are interested in accessibility. A lot of times we'll have a speaker. Bruce came and moderated one of our presentations. That was really fantastic. They're coming up with a new lineup for this, you know, this next year. That's going to be great. And I think December is going to be an opportunity to just kind of casually meet people, but also to give feedback about what you're interested in. So it'd be great to see you there. Oh, and I promised you another doggy picture. This is Darby just the other night. She kind of gets lost in the background there, but she loves to dig. And she is a rare, not that common of a breed. They're known for their truffle hunting. They love to dig. So I'm like, in the backyard, she's digging up my whole backyard, and I'm like, she was bred to dig. So what do I do? I don't really know what to do. But the reason that I'm talking to you about this is because, you know, she's really unique. She's a unique kind of a dog. I would say with this, you know, career ahead of you, whichever direction you end up going, find something really unique, find your niche, and go for it. And that's what I got for you. Thank you so much. Please do find me on LinkedIn and on Twitter, and feel free to reach out to me, you know, by email or on my website as well. Questions?
What's the major hurdle for people who are trying to use the shopping cart? You repeated that a couple times, but I wanted to get what specifically do they find is the biggest problem with it that people should be aware of when developing a shopping cart?
Sure. So, and Bruce, maybe you can help me on this as well. So I'm just imagining putting yourself in Tommy Edison's shoes and navigating with, you know, your braille display and listening and filling out forms like, I want 2 of this, and making sure everything's labeled properly, and then going through the checkout process and entering your credit card information, sometimes having a form timeout. Same thing with like filing a job application, for example. It's very laborious, and it takes time to kind of listen to each field and make sure that it's in fact what it is that you're trying to do. But yeah.
Get your order filled out, all the form filled out. They've sold out of a product, you can do Cyber Monday.
Sure. Sounds like personal experience there. Cyber Monday today here.
Are there any maybe gold standard shopping carts that you can think of? I mean, how does Amazon do with their shopping cart? Or
oh, that's a good
who's
question.
doing it well?
Right.
Yeah.
Who's doing it well?
What do you think about, who asked that question about the shopping cart, Amazon? Andrew, what's your experience with the Amazon shopping cart? Is it something you can-
I have Google like auto form fill outs enabled, so it, I just click on it and then it fills out forms automatically for me.
Yeah, I'm talking about the experience of the shopping cart, actually placing the order, going through all the steps. Personally?
Their one-click feature they came out with on the app makes it really easy for me to purchase something impulsively, which is probably a bad thing.
Well, I'm getting to the fact of when I use Amazon, even as a sighted user, it can get difficult sometimes. There's a lot of stuff on the screen, right? Especially with they go from screen to screen, and it's difficult for me, and I'm sure it's difficult for a lot of you. So I don't think Amazon has perfected I mean, sure, they're a $100 billion company, whatever Jeff Bezos is worth now. But I still find the order system on Amazon challenging sometimes.
Amazon is super clunky anyway, like their load time, it's one of the slowest load times, right, on the whole web, and yet people are still going to them. I mean, it's a huge system, right?
Their philosophy very much is more is better. They're not simple is better. It's very much they want everything, every opportunity, every option, putting it out there. It is clunky. It's terrible design.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Don't you miss when they just used to sell books? Like that was it, just books.
Yeah, I do until like my Amazon package shows up and I'm like,
that's
it's here. That was so easy. Yeah.
I know more about like how deaf users or hearing impaired users use technology, but I'm not so much know about blind users or vision impaired. Are they more using desktops and not mobile devices, or is it really more of a mix? I would imagine it would be more computer based versus mobile based.
I mean,
Do you know anything
actually,
about blind users? That is a big
Apple has done an incredible job of disrupting the market. So in the past, for blind users, in the past, blind users would have all these like braille display devices that they'd bring around and like lots of assistive technology to kind of make it work. And now they've got voice, which you use Siri, right? You just plug it into your ear, and then from what I understand, there are these cool gestures. So it's kind of like using a mouse, right? Where you can like actually gesture on your phone, no X out of there, or swipe left, swipe. I mean, we all use that, right? Like swiping. But there's other kinds of gestures that can be used on a cell phone for accessibility. So, it's different, but it's
so
not
there still
necessarily
are a lot
less.
of blind users using mobile, not just laptops. So that is still something to keep in consideration. Okay.
The thing that I still have I always think about are people with cognitive disability and their ability to process what we as designers and developers put in front of them. And I forgot what the percentage was up there, but it was what, 6?
Like 6.4.
Yeah, and that's a pretty high percentage.
Yeah.
And
it was.
And that's, how would you say it? That's probably people with diagnosed cognitive disorders.
Sure.
But I think again, the interfaces and sites we put in front of people, we get in that echo chamber where we just know it so well, we know how to navigate and use it. And that comes down to some of the stuff we talked about with content strategy, content marketing, analytics, all that kind of stuff. And I think it's really hard to do universal design and cater to everyone. Because your people who don't have cognitive disorders are going to say, this is weak, this is too easy, I must be doing something wrong, or there's web and accessibility is tough.
Well, even within that cognitive disorders, their abilities range so greatly that I don't know really how they can pinpoint that as a single category. Because there's some people that have very low cognitive, period, end of discussion, and there's some people that have such high cognitive they can't even focus.
Yeah, I mean, it gets really messy. One of our speakers that came in this last year, if you're interested in kind of more about plain language and cognitive accessibility, Whitney Quisenberry, her name is, and she's really passionate about like voter rights And I mean, talk about a place where you want things to be accessible, right? Like for any of us just reading some of these motions that they're passing and laws that they're, you know, trying to pass and whatnot, you want it to just be easy to understand, like, okay, well, am I for or against? I don't know, right? But then, you know, for people with disabilities and people with cognitive impairments, so she's done a whole lot on plain language, and that's what she keeps going back to. I'd say structurally there's a lot to think about as well in terms of how you set things up. A lot of the web accessibility sites that I visit that are like AAA, you know, compliant, or like AA or whatnot, I look at it and I go, this is a lot of text. Like, it doesn't feel accessible to me because I like a lot of pictures that tell me, oh, that's the thing that I need to really hone in on, or that's, so I agree, like finding universal design that really works for everybody. Okay, yeah, your screen reader may do great on that, and you may be able to understand every single word and jump to it, you know, jump from one, you know, piece of content to the next in the correct order. But is it going to be understandable for me as someone who's just wanting to kind of breeze through it? And that's hard balance to strike.
Are we fooling ourselves with universal design then?
No, I think, you know, we adapt what's presented based on a device. Why don't we do the same thing based on, you know, saying, okay, we've got a visually impaired group, this is the content for that group, and versus a hearing, you know. So I think trying to generate one page that's going to do everything, I think is
that was exactly what I was thinking just now too, is there a way that they would pick up on the fact that you're using something that's assisting you in that way, and therefore you actually get a completely different experience from somebody who would otherwise, you know, not have those issues.
Oh, we do have ARIA tags and things like that, which assistive devices we pick up on that are embedded into a page.
Oh, what are they called?
ARIA. Yeah. We go over that on Wednesday if you'd like.
I mean, you don't want to divide your user base into different groups, but at the same time, if you try to hyper-focus on everybody, it's like appeal to everybody and end up appealing to nobody, or appeal to individual people and appeal to everybody. It's like,
but why
you've got to find that even balance.
I don't see why not. Why not divide? I don't get. I mean, maybe it's a politically incorrect position, but I mean, if one presentation is going to benefit a visually impaired user versus another who's deaf.
Well, and as a marketer, I look at that all the time with my clients, right? So like, I'm like, okay, well, you have to kind of think about what you can get your bang for your buck, right? And for me, I think about my clients and, you know, do they want me to spend the time, the billable hours, to go in and add all of the alt tags, and to, you know, to do all of that? How important is it going to be depending on the client? And sometimes, I mean, you have to make those hard decisions. I think overall, the kind of separate but equal thing, it doesn't really work to say, oh, you know, blind people go over to this separate site that's easier for you, and everyone else has this site, or deaf people. Although a lot of times deaf people would just rather have something that's just interpreted specifically for them, right? But as far as like, you know, and you think about it in terms of university or government, like,
that'd be a lot.
Do you, like, if you have like a public service announcement to make or whatever it is, I mean, say an emergency announcement, you want the person, the mayor, whoever it is, there's a hurricane, and the interpreter right there saying it right and doing it well, so that you get that information, you know, in those high stakes situations at the same time in the same way. Yeah.
Well, thinking along the same lines as Brent, is it any worse than websites that have click here for Spanish? You know, it's the same thing. You're communicating in a different language essentially to a certain sector of the population. So having a click here for text assistance or whatever, you know, better contrast, change the color contrast, something like that. I mean, it would be more work to build a web page for every condition, but for certain things like public accessibility, things that are important, I think there's an avenue for that. I think there's a reason for it in situations.
It's interesting to think about, and it's interesting to think about as kind of a thought exercise, and then the actual application of it, and, you know, the business cases for it and whatnot play out. And the law, and the law, and the finances, right? Yeah.
I think honestly, you hit the nail on the head with bang for your buck, because yes, say, I mean, in an example of a class like this. Right now, this is perfect for anybody without a disability, but if somebody is blind or deaf, it's like, okay, well, we can have somebody up here doing it for you, or we could just have a specific presentation just for people with disabilities. But it's like, okay, but the percentage is so low that it can only happen so often, so it's like, well, we have to hire specific people to come in. And it's that way with medication, with just everyday objects. They're more expensive for people with disabilities.
For the
because
class, I think for the class, for example, hopefully I described all my slides so someone who's
Oh, no, you
low
did an
vision or
excellent job with
whatnot
that.
could access it even if they didn't have full vision.
And I
think that if there were a deaf student, Clark would provide an interpreter.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
But what I'm saying is, like, they're so used to having to pay more for things because it's like, oh, well, we have to cater to you. So instead of, just for 30 students, it's just you. So instead of 30 students worth of money, it's just your money. And so you have to cater for people. And something I was actually talking to Colin about is like, yeah, you could have websites where it's like Spanish up here. But with all of the stuff going on right now with net neutrality, it's like, okay, cool. Yeah, we could have a website specifically designed for deaf people. $20 more because we had to do it. Because we had to take the time to split it out. So we're going to charge you more. And I mean, they do that with medication. They do that with wheelchairs. They do that with, all sorts of things. And it's like, wow, that could be made for $10 in parts, but they're charging $10,000 because where else are you going to get it? And I mean, working back as a CNA, that was the thing. It's like, oh, you want a scale that you can sit on? Well, this one is certified for people with disabilities who maybe can't walk or something. It's the exact same one as this one over here at Walmart, but it's not certified. This one at Walmart is $200. This one is $2,000.
I think that does happen where people take advantage, and I think that more often than not, I think that there are a lot of costs in terms of the overhead of creating custom solutions and creating solutions specifically for folks. I have a funny example, and that's from my bachelorette party. I got married in 2014. I actually had a bachelor party. We all went out in drag, and I had deaf friends, right? So, and what I really wanted was like just a night to go out and like have some entertainment and like it was like a piano bar or something. So I call, my bridesmaid. She's like, I don't understand how I'm supposed to advocate for this. I'm like, I'm an interpreter. I advocate for this kind of stuff all the time. So I call and I talk to the guy and I'm like, I need you to provide an interpreter for your music. And he's like, how many of you are there in your group? Like, if there's 5 of you, it's going to cost me money to have you there, to hire an interpreter. Like, you start getting into kind of what that is. And so we were able to kind of finally work it out. So we had like enough people in the group that it justified him paying the interpreter, and then it was just a wash for him, right? Whereas if it had been another group that didn't need those sign language interpreters there, then our cover fee, $15 each for a group of 10 or 20 ladies or whatnot, he would have been able to pocket that money, right? That money that he would have profited went to the sign language interpreter instead of to him. And he's like, well, this is kind of a win-win because at least you're buying drinks, right?
Yeah,
but like he's in business,
and you're
right?
a future advocate. That's a place to go. It's like with the deaf community, like when they find a spot, like where they're welcome, like you keep going.
And then the business owner's like, I don't necessarily want to have more expensive clients coming to me to demand access. Or come drink, buy all our drinks, right? Yeah, I mean it's really tricky. So I think that I don't think that having people pay for their own accommodations is ideal, and sometimes you have to kind of get creative. But there have been a lot of situations where I would have really liked to have brought my deaf friend or my deaf sister, and I wasn't going to pay for it out of pocket, and it didn't scale. Now actually a real life example with our meetup, we had someone. I think it was one of Bruce's previous students, maybe.
Yes, it was.
He requested an interpreter. It was the last minute. We weren't able to do it, but we've been paying for our meetup out of pocket, so that's like $100 a year to pay like the meetup fees, right? And like we had the space donated, and we had it all, whatever. And then we're like, right, we should make our meetup accessible. It's about accessibility. That's such a meta problem, And like here we're talking about, okay, so we have 6 events a year. That's $300 for each one. And none of us 3 organizers, like we're already just giving our time. We're not, So now we're going after sponsors, but what that takes is that we've gotten to a level of maturity with 750 members, where our members are donating a little bit, and our sponsors that we're approaching say, oh, you've raised a couple of $100s from your members. That must mean it's important. We'll donate as well. And we have sponsors who are in the accessibility space, so it makes sense. But what that means is that now my bandwidth is focused on sponsors, right, to kind of make it all work. And then other people are doing the program, which is great because we are at that level of maturity. But a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we just, we wouldn't have necessarily been able to come up. We would have hopefully come up with a different creative solution. Yeah. Over.
Oh, what? Oh, it was me. Sorry.
I don't know.
You're good. So sometimes you don't notice these issues until they come up.
Right.
Just something you just don't think about. And as somebody who lives in the world and makes a point to notice these issues, as students, is there something that you could say, hey, I would love to see you guys be able to do this in a couple of years when you're working in this world, like, the chances of one of us being a CEO of something is actually not that bad. And it's like, is there something that it's something super obvious of a problem that maybe not everybody notices and it just bugs you, like, can we just get this one thing fixed? Like, what would you like to see us do in the future?
I mean, as a CEO, I'd like to see you doing, we're thinking about accessibility earlier on, right? And I mean, we can do that at our own, whatever it is that we're doing as well now, right? Like for our meetup, it's like, well, here's what we can do with accessibility, and then once we get to this point, we can make it even more accessible. I would say, yeah, thinking about it kind of early and often, especially in your UX design process and your development process, thinking about accessibility early. It's much less expensive to build it accessibly than it is to fix the accessibility.
Specifically with
Bruce?
Chrissy, I was going to say that I have a video from one of the speakers who was supposed to speak this year, Troy Guyon, a former student who spoke last year. I'll share the video tonight, where he works for the city of Vancouver, which is a government agency, and they had launched a new Clark.gov site, which had to include accessibility. So if you listen to his talk, you'll hear him talk about what they had to do in order to make the site accessible to people with disabilities. So I'll share that tonight.
That's from last year?
Yes.
Cool.
I was gonna say, as far as like just being facility accessible, as we've come across things as being wheelchair accessible specifically, and just notify, hey, there's a manager's Safeway. By the way, your bathroom stall door swings the wrong way. So once you get a wheelchair in there, you can't close the door. You need to fix it. No, nothing ever happens. Mention again. And finally, someday we go in and yay, it's fixed.
That's
so
nice.
how many times do people have to complain about it before it actually happens, But, and then there's some things where state facility was state park. The restrooms were not accessible, and it was past mandate law time for those to be accessible. As a state facility, they should have been on that right away, and it took one letter and it was fixed in 6 months.
Yeah.
So there's the accountability of a facility. So as we are coming into building websites and learning things for ourselves, we need to make sure that we have that accountability to make these things happen. Because nobody else is going to make them happen for us.
Sure. Well, and choosing the time and the place that you're going to advocate, right? Like, I mean, because there's anywhere you look, there's something that you could be advocating for outside of accessibility, but even just within accessibility. And so kind of, picking your battles and deciding how you're gonna put yourself out there like that, I thought of another answer to your question, Mr. CEO, and that is actually before you even get to CEO status, as developers and designers, one thing that would be really good is to have user testers. So there's these tools that I mentioned tonight, and then there's also having people with disabilities actually test what it is that you're creating. Yeah. Yeah.
It was actually we were supposed to create a fake business model. My business model was to create user testers that were accessible using real people who have, disabilities. And how would we actually make a users test group out of that? It's funny you mentioned it, because that was
You'll have to compete with us.
Oh, I want to see. That sounds really interesting.
That was my project.
That's cool.
We definitely open up employment for people that had issues like that.
Yeah.
Because we need to learn how to cater specifically to this, so this is the tester we need.
Yes, absolutely.
That was what I was more, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I should have my business idea.
And I can just keep answering questions and talking all night. I don't know how I'll follow your lead here, Bruce, on timing and whatnot.
If there's any more questions, go.
You got plenty of time.
Well, mine was just more out of curiosity, not to be the video, but I was just wondering with the increase of people getting cochlear implants, because a lot of my friends are in that stage where they've gone cochlear, but they're still they're still learning that new language. Do they still consider that as part of the deaf or hearing statistic, or is it once you go cochlear, you're no longer considered, at least in the world sometimes, in the community, you're kind of in that purgatory of the hearing and the non-hearing world, and you're not really part of either
it's so
culture.
confusing. It's so confusing, and I've gotten myself in really hot water before where I get up and it's like I'm trying to represent the deaf community when, even though I have a deaf sister, I'm not deaf. You know,
Yeah.
so I can't completely answer that question, but what I can say is that how these, any of these statistics that we talked about tonight, how people identify or don't identify, whether or not they're disabled, is so complex that we really have to think about those numbers in that context. Because any one of us might have one of these disabilities or some spectrum of these disabilities that we were talking about tonight and not be disclosing to us, right? And that's their private business, whether they want to disclose or not. So, you know, I've known many deaf people who identify very strongly as part of deaf culture, and maybe they have cochlear implants as well, and then whether or not they choose to identify as disabled, you know, there's a real divide. There's a real divide there. People might have multiple disabilities, and how do you actually measure something like that? So, like in the deaf community, a lot of people use video phones. So there's some numbers that you can get, you know, based on who the consumers of who's using a video phone. But then you start getting into people who become deaf later in life.
Oh yeah.
Right? And then the numbers get really blurry because there's a lot more people with hearing loss who are 80 than who are 50 or 60.
It's a
right?
different culture being elderly and having hearing loss versus growing up in a deaf culture. Like,
Right. And you're talking about cultural identity. I mean, I think a lot of the kiddos who are getting cochlear implants now, there is still that range of identities, but I do think it's shifting. Yeah.
Also, the word disabled just has such negative connotations to it that it's sort of like the PC thing. It's like, is it disabled? Is it okay to say deaf?
Sure.
Is it okay to say? And it's like the problem is, okay, I'm fine with you saying that I'm deaf, or I'm fine with you saying that I'm blind, but this person might not be, and they're not going to be okay with you saying disabled, and this person's not going to be. So it's like that connotation of, well, I'm not disabled. Well, you're deaf. Okay, but I'm not disabled, so they're not going to classify. And it's just like,
that's very common.
It's interesting, something like that happened to me at work once, but it wasn't over a disabled person. I had a manager who was trying to describe a new employee to one of the other employees because they were supposed to train her up. And after listening to her for 5 minutes trying to describe this girl, I finally said, "It's the black girl."
yeah, and it's like, is that okay, or is that going to piss
They
somebody
looked at
off?
me in shock, and I'm like, no, really, I've been sitting here for like 5 minutes. It's the one thing you were not saying that would have immediately identified her. She's the only one that works here.
Well, and as far bringing it back to disability, I mean, that's an interesting example. Bringing it back to disability, it's the one minority group that we're all going to be part of if we're not part of it already, right? At least temporarily. I mean, there's all sorts of thought out there about, you know, if you're pregnant, then you're temporarily disabled, and you injure an arm or a leg, and then as you age, you know, it's so varied and complex. We'll all be dealing with these issues at one point or another. Yeah.
And you never know which one's going to be the one that sets somebody off. You know, I ended up asking her about it. Would that really have offended you if you'd have been around when I said that? And she said, no, that's how I identify.
Right.
It's like, well, yeah, you know, but they weren't sure, which is why they were avoiding it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, that's a tricky one. I've found myself in that situation on both sides where I've been like, oh yeah, it's fine for me to just say that, and other times where I'm like, that's not what's relevant. Try to find something else, you know, that I could use. Try
If there's
that.
any other way to say it, fine.
Yeah.
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 You know, what I'm thinking about is augmented reality and virtual reality and accessibility.
Whoa.
Yeah. So we're doing the web right now, which has been around a long time, and accessibility standards have, you know, arisen. But what about things that are, you know, on the horizon, technology-wise, that we don't know about or are just beginning to, you know, become popular? How does accessibility apply to all those things?
I'm excited about augmented reality and artificial intelligence and how that can really benefit people with disabilities. Absolutely. When I think about augmented reality and, like, I don't know, people sitting around in, like, what are they called, like haptic suits or whatnot, like, I think more in terms of the people with mobility impairments, right? And and I know that, you know, like, even just video games, like, that can be a social avenue for someone who mobility is, you know, more difficult for them. They can go and have a social outlet on a video game in a different way.
It's different. I remember talking to my best friends, and it was always we were on a TDD machine, like next to each other, typing with each other, or calling the TDD operator. And like the first time when we moved around, we never got to see each other or hear each other. But when you finally started getting video calling
Yes.
to the TV and all these new things, and being able to have someone like sign on TV and have the interpreter. That's how I kind of imagine videos going. Like you have somebody signing there and someone's live interpreting with you, for you. It'd be kind of cool if we had AIs that would live interpret sign language and put sign to speech instead of speech to text. I don't know if that's.
Well, so there's one
That's
with
what I
like,
was thinking of.
there's one, they're like gloves, and they were developed by some students, and you can put them on and sign, it has a limited vocabulary, but you can make some signs, and then it will spit them out into speech.
Yep.
And
That's awesome, yeah.
it's exciting and it's cool, I think, in terms of being a seed of where the technology can go.
Mhm.
I think that from my perspective, it would be more exciting if I could put on some gloves that would teach me to sign.
Right.
Right?
That's
So that like I could just put them on and then be fluent with whoever it was that I wanted to communicate with, and then that puts the burden on me as someone who doesn't know sign, like if I was someone who didn't know sign language, then I could get the gloves and like and sign, as opposed to like having a deaf person bring around these gloves, right, and then being limited to like this certain vocabulary, and then having it speak out in voice, and then really, what so many times what deaf people are advocating for in terms of access is being able to hear what other people are saying.
Some drive-thrus are
and
not
hear all
very
this,
good.
all this information.
Eliza,
Yeah.
did deaf people prefer written text or sign language?
It's a good question.
Brent would be the best one to answer that.
Yeah, that's interesting, because my wife lost her hearing at 17, so she had good English skills, and so the community she's involved with, they typically have better English than average, but most of the deaf community, it's a struggle. The sentences, and the ASL is a very different language, syntactically and so forth than English. So, yeah, I'd say ASL would be what most of them would want. Yeah.
And we'll still do ESL. They're not really even trained for proper ASL. Like at home, we just had ESL slang. We just call it like slang.
Yeah.
But there's like human.
That's a good question, Bruce. I don't know. And I know that when you think about like the core of the deaf community, how they have that really strong deaf identity culturally, and they're like rightly saying, ours is a language, we deserve equal access, all of that. There's a really strong identity there. And as far as the numbers go, your question was about what most of them prefer.
Correct.
Right? And so then you think about that outer ring of people who are maybe not so culturally, invested, but just want access, and maybe they speak English and they're fine. I don't know if the core is most in terms of quantity, right? I know that the strongest identity comes out of the core.
Yeah.
Right? But I don't know in terms of numbers, kind of people with some hearing loss who aren't necessarily part of the core.
The core is going to be the loudest, not necessarily the biggest volumes.
In terms of quantity of people, exactly. Yeah. And it's
some
just
research to see if there's any company, whether it's IBM or Microsoft, that does some animated sign language transcribing from video and audio. That would be interesting.
That would be interesting.
I was wondering if Jane Croft's video was captioned.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Are you gonna?
I was just thinking, like,
caption all
was
this
it
stuff?
auto captioned?
Kind of have to now.
Ha 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 ha.
We had a speaker who was hearing impaired.
I know Jane.
Oh, okay.
You should have talked faster throughout.
I just kept wondering, because she watched her own video.
No.
Okay.
So I try to capture. I have a hard enough time keeping up with captioning of my videos, and I tend to, and I'll follow my own sort here. I capture them when I have, a student who needs the captioning. I do that, religiously, but I have hundreds of videos, and I don't have the bandwidth or the manpower, the person power to transcribe them all right now. And that's where I think technology, Google gets mine 80% correct, and I should show you this in the next class. Google can take my videos, it can say, here's what I think you said. It can present me with an editor where I can go in and change. I'll show you this on Wednesday. We'll do Jane's video.
It's pretty cool. Do
yeah.
mine.
please. I'll show you on Wednesday how to use the Google YouTube transcription services to take what they give you and then for you to fix it and make it what it should be.
Yeah.
Cool.
And which, I mean, it's gotten so much better.
Yeah,
Like,
it is
really has.
great, but you realize
Tried it
how
before.
long it gets fixed sometimes.
Yeah, and it's so laborious.
Yeah.
In fact, like accessibility offices at lots of universities, they'll say captioning is just such a big part of their budget.
Mhm.
You know, you can buy a machine and then it's going to do so much in terms of assistive technology, but the videos just keep and exponentially. You know, there's much more video content.
Anything else for Eliza before we?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.